Sir, I have concerns about his first-class ticket. He's being disruptive.
Stand up now or you'll be removed from the
I
aircraft.
showed you my ticket. It's valid. I've done nothing wrong.
Flight attendant Lauren Whitfield, employee ID 68297 with 8 years of service at the airline, walked through the first-class cabin conducting her standard pre-departure check. The atmosphere was quiet and polished, tailored suits, designer handbags, low conversations about quarterly earnings and board meetings. Everything looked exactly the way she expected it to, until she reached row 1. In seat 1A by the window sat Adrian Caldwell, a black man in his early 40s. He wore dark slacks, a crisp white shirt without a tie, and a fitted gray blazer. A slim leather briefcase rested beneath the seat in front of him. He was calmly reading something on a tablet, completely composed. Lauren stopped mid-step, her expression shifted. She turned and walked directly toward him. "Sir, I need to see your boarding pass." Her tone lacked the warmth she had just used moments earlier when greeting 2 white passengers with friendly smiles. Adrian looked up slowly. He recognized the look, the subtle disbelief, the silent calculation. He had seen it before in upscale hotels, executive lounges, and premium cabins. "Is there a problem?" he asked evenly. "We've had a few seating mix-ups this morning," Lauren replied, though no such announcement had been made. "I need to confirm you're actually assigned to this seat." A man across the aisle lowered his magazine slightly. A woman in the next row paused mid-text. Adrian reached calmly into his jacket pocket and handed her his boarding pass. It clearly displayed, Flight 4578 Boston to Los Angeles, Seat 1A, first-class paid fare, $1,720 passenger. Adrian Caldwell Lauren studied it longer than necessary. She flipped it over, examined the barcode, tilted it under the cabin lighting. "Are you sure this is your ticket?" she asked. Adrian felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the understanding that he was about to be required to justify his presence somewhere he had legally paid to be. "Yes," he said calmly, "it's mine. I purchased it personally." "First class is quite expensive," Lauren said slowly. "Did you pay full fare or was this some kind of upgrade?" The man across the aisle shifted uncomfortably. Adrian kept his voice controlled. "I paid full price with my credit card. Is there a reason you're questioning that?" Lauren's jaw stiffened. "I just want to make sure there hasn't been a booking error." "There hasn't," Adrian replied. "I'm in my assigned seat." "May I continue reading?" She didn't step away. Instead, she stood there studying him, not the ticket anymore, but him, as though searching for a justification that wasn't there. Finally, she said, "I'm going to verify this with the gate." "Please remain seated." "You're holding a valid boarding pass," Adrian responded. "There's nothing to verify. I'll be right back." She turned sharply and walked toward the front galley. Adrian watched her go, already sensing the escalation. He had navigated moments like this before, the doubt, the suspicion, the unspoken assumption that he must have done something wrong to occupy certain spaces. But something about her tone suggested this wouldn't end quietly. At the front of the aircraft, Lauren picked up the intercom phone. "This is first class on Flight 4578, she said in a lowered voice. "I need airport security to board. There's a passenger in 1A whose ticket needs to be checked." The gate agent sounded confused. "Is the boarding pass valid?" "Yes, but I have concerns." "Correct name, correct seat." "Correct flight?" "Yes, but I'd feel more comfortable if security verified." A pause. "If the ticket is valid, I'm not sure what security would. Please just send them." She hung up. Back in seat 1A, Adrian could hear fragments of the conversation. The woman across the aisle now held her phone angled subtly toward the exchange. Lauren returned to the cabin. "Security is on the way to verify your ticket," she announced loudly. Adrian closed his tablet slowly. "Security is coming because I'm sitting in a seat I paid for. Security is coming to confirm everything is in order." "It already is." The woman across the aisle spoke up. "He showed you his ticket. What's the issue?" "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you," Lauren replied sharply. The man across the aisle added, "He's been here quietly the whole time." Lauren's composure tightened further. "Security will handle it." Adrian leaned back, hands visible, posture relaxed. He understood what was unfolding. The aircraft door was still open. 3 minutes later, Airport Security Officer Trevor Callahan, a decade-long veteran of airport enforcement, stepped onto the plane. His hand rested near his radio as he scanned the first-class cabin. "What's the situation?" he asked, directing the question to Lauren. "This passenger may not belong in this seat," she replied immediately. "He's refusing to cooperate." Adrian looked up. "I haven't refused anything. I showed her my valid boarding pass." Callahan turned toward him with skepticism already visible. "Sir, why are you causing a disturbance?" "I'm not," Adrian said evenly. "I have a valid first-class ticket. I'm sitting in my assigned seat." He reached for his boarding pass from Lauren's hand and handed it directly to Callahan. The officer glanced at it briefly, no more than 2 seconds. Everything was correct. He handed it back dismissively. "That doesn't mean you get to argue with crew." "I'm not arguing," Adrian replied. "I'm reading." Callahan's eyes hardened. "You people always say that." The cabin fell silent, phones were raised higher. Lauren seized the moment. "I don't believe he actually paid for first class," she added. Callahan nodded. "That's enough." Adrian stared at them. "Enough for what?" The officer stepped closer. "Stand up now or we'll remove you." The tension in the cabin became undeniable. Passengers exchanged looks. Someone whispered, "This isn't right." Another voice said, "He hasn't done anything." Callahan raised his hand sharply. "I'm not asking the passengers." The woman recording lifted her phone higher. "I have everything on video." Callahan looked at her coldly. "Put it down or you'll be next." Adrian felt the weight of the moment settle in. A routine morning flight, a fully paid ticket. And yet he was being threatened with removal from seat 1A, not because of anything he had done, but because someone decided he didn't look like he belonged there. And this was only the beginning. The tension inside the first-class cabin thickened. Adrian Caldwell remained seated, hands resting calmly on the armrests, posture controlled. He had learned long ago that any sudden movement could be misinterpreted. His expression stayed neutral, but inside a cold clarity was forming. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was escalation. Airport security officer Trevor Callahan stood directly over him. "Sir, this is your final warning." "Stand up." Adrian looked up steadily. "On what grounds are you ordering me to leave a seat I legally purchased? You're refusing to comply with crew instructions." "I complied," Adrian replied. "She asked for my boarding pass. I provided it. She questioned whether I paid. I answered, I have done nothing disruptive." Lauren Whitfield crossed her arms tighter. "He's being argumentative," she added quickly. "I don't feel comfortable with him remaining on board." A murmur rippled through the cabin. The businessman in 2A stood up slightly. "He hasn't argued once," he said firmly. "We've been watching since she approached him." A woman from row 3 added, "This is unnecessary. He showed his ticket." Callahan turned sharply toward them. "I'm not asking the passengers. This is between crew and security." Another phone appeared in the aisle, then another. At least 6 devices were now visibly recording. Adrian noticed everything. He also noticed something else. The aircraft door was still open, jet bridge attached. If this turned physical, it would happen in front of everyone. He slowly reached into his briefcase. Callahan stiffened immediately, hand hovering near his belt. "Hands where I can see them." Adrian froze his movement. "I'm retrieving identification," he said calmly. "Nothing else." He opened the slim leather case slowly and pulled out a dark credential wallet. He stood, but only halfway, enough to hold it up clearly at eye level. The gold badge caught the cabin light. "My name is Adrian Caldwell. I'm a senior federal investigator assigned to interagency counterterrorism operations. I'm traveling on official business." The cabin went silent. Lauren's face drained of color. Callahan blinked. Adrian flipped the credential open so the identification card was visible. His photo, federal seal, clearance designation. "I paid $1,720 for this seat with my personal card," Adrian continued, voice steady. "Agency policy does not reimburse premium cabins, but I require privacy to review sensitive material. That is why I fly first class." Callahan took a half step back. Lauren's posture shifted from rigid to uncertain. The businessman in 2A exhaled audibly. Adrian lowered the credentials slightly but did not put them away. "None of you asked what I do. None of you reviewed the boarding pass carefully. You assumed I didn't belong here." Callahan cleared his throat. "Sir, if we had known." "You didn't know because you didn't ask," Adrian interrupted calmly. "You saw a black man in seat 1A and decided something must be wrong." Lauren tried to speak. "I was just following procedure." "There is no procedure that requires questioning only one passenger in the cabin," Adrian replied. The woman recording spoke up from across the aisle. "I have the entire interaction on video," she said clearly. "She never asked anyone else for their ticket." That statement seemed to land heavily. Callahan glanced around and finally noticed the phones, the angles, the red recording indicators. This was no longer private. Adrian continued. "You threatened to remove me physically, based on what?" "A feeling." Lauren's hands trembled slightly. Callahan's earlier aggression had evaporated. But before anyone could respond further, another presence entered the cabin. Captain Robert Hensley, mid-50s, silver hair, 30 years of flight experience, stepped out of the cockpit after being notified of the delay. "What's going on back here?" he demanded. Lauren turned toward him quickly. "This passenger is refusing to cooperate." Adrian met the captain's eyes. "I cooperated fully. I showed my boarding pass. I answered every question. I have been sitting quietly since boarding." Hensley looked briefly at Callahan, who gave a small shrug. Without asking Adrian a single follow-up question, the captain spoke. "Sir, if my crew member has asked you to deplane, you need to comply." The cabin reacted instantly. "That's not fair," someone called out. "He did nothing," another voice added. The woman recording raised her voice. "I have proof." "He's been calm the whole time." Captain Hensley raised his hand. "This is my aircraft. I make final decisions." Adrian felt something settle deep inside his chest, not fear, not anger, but recognition. 3 authority figures. No investigation, no evidence, just alignment. He held up his credentials again. "I am a federal investigator on assignment," he said firmly. If you attempt to remove me without lawful cause, you are escalating this into a federal civil rights matter. Silence. Hensley finally looked directly at the badge, and for the first time since this began, doubt crossed his face. But the damage had already been done. The entire first-class cabin had witnessed what unfolded, and multiple cameras had captured every second. This was no longer about Seat 1A, it was about what happens when assumption becomes action, and the consequences were just beginning to unfold. Captain Robert Hensley stared at the federal credentials in Adrian Caldwell's hand, the authority in his posture noticeably diminished. The confident command he had carried out of the cockpit seconds earlier was replaced with hesitation. "You're federal?" Hensley asked, his voice no longer firm. "Senior federal investigator," Adrian replied evenly. 12 years in counterterrorism coordination. I just returned from a multi-state security briefing. I boarded this aircraft early, sat quietly, and opened my tablet. That is the extent of my conduct." Lauren Whitfield's face had turned pale. The certainty she had shown moments earlier was gone. Security Officer Trevor Callahan shifted his stance, no longer looming. "Sir, if we had known your position," Adrian cut him off calmly. "My position should not matter." That statement hung in the air. A passenger near the aisle nodded. "He's right," Adrian continued. "The only reason this escalated is because you assumed I didn't belong in this cabin. You questioned whether I could afford the seat. You implied my ticket might be fraudulent. You threatened physical removal without cause." Lauren tried again. "I was just trying to verify." "You verified," Adrian said firmly. "The boarding pass was valid, the barcode scanned, my name matched my ID. Yet you still called security." Captain Hensley rubbed his temple. "This appears to have been a misunderstanding." "No," Adrian replied quietly, "it was profiling." The word made the cabin even quieter. Phones were still raised. A man in row 3 spoke up. "She didn't ask anyone else for their boarding pass." Another added, "She went straight to him." Callahan finally seemed aware of the optics. "Let's de-escalate this," he said cautiously. Adrian held his credentials steady for a moment longer before placing them back into his wallet slowly, deliberately. "I was ordered to stand or be removed," he said. "On what legal basis?" No one answered. Hensley cleared his throat. "Sir, no one is being removed at this time." "But I was threatened," Adrian replied, "in front of a full cabin." Lauren's voice trembled slightly. "I didn't intend for this to go this far. It went this far the moment you decided I didn't belong here." There was no anger in his tone now, just precision. The woman recording stepped into the aisle slightly. "I captured everything," she said, "from the first question to the threat." Several other passengers confirmed they had video as well. Hensley's expression changed again, this time calculation. The plane was already delayed nearly 20 minutes. The cabin was fully aware of what had just happened, and multiple digital copies of it were likely seconds away from being uploaded. "Sir," the captain began carefully, "you are welcome to remain in your seat. There is no need for further disruption." Adrian looked at him steadily. "There was never disruption." Callahan stepped back toward the jet bridge entrance. "Maybe we can all move forward." "Forward," Adrian repeated. He glanced around at the witnesses. "You threatened a paying passenger with removal based on a suspicion you could not articulate." Lauren swallowed. Hensley shifted his tone again, now attempting diplomacy. "We value all of our passengers. If you felt singled out—" "I was singled out," Adrian said flatly. A silence followed. The aircraft door was still open. Ground crew moved outside, unaware of the internal crisis unfolding. Adrian slowly sat back down in Seat 1A. "I will remain seated," he said, "and this flight will depart." Hensley hesitated, then nodded to Callahan. The security officer stepped off the aircraft. Lauren remained frozen near the galley. Passengers lowered their phones slightly, but none fully put them away. Adrian reopened his tablet. His breathing was steady, but inside something had shifted. This was no longer an uncomfortable moment to ignore. This was documentation, and documentation leads to accountability. The captain returned toward the cockpit without another word. Lauren remained standing in the aisle, visibly shaken. The cabin crew resumed boarding procedures mechanically, but the atmosphere had changed. What had begun as a quiet morning flight from Boston to Los Angeles had become something much larger. And although the aircraft would soon push back from the gate, the real consequences of what happened in Seat 1A had not even begun to surface. The aircraft finally pushed back from the gate 32 minutes behind schedule. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere remained tight and uneasy. Conversations were quieter now. Several passengers were still holding their phones, reviewing what they had recorded. A few were already typing rapidly, likely sending the footage to friends, colleagues, or posting it online. In Seat 1A, Adrian Caldwell appeared composed. His tablet was open again, but he wasn't reading, he was thinking. He knew this moment was bigger than a delayed flight, bigger than an apology. Across the aisle, the woman who had recorded most of the interaction leaned slightly toward him. "I'm sending this to myself and backing it up," she whispered. "Just in case," Adrian nodded. "Thank you." In the galley, Lauren Whitfield stood stiffly, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the front cabin. A junior flight attendant whispered something to her, but Lauren didn't respond. Captain Robert Hensley remained in the cockpit, unusually silent during his pre-departure announcement. When he finally spoke over the intercom, his voice was measured and controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We appreciate your patience." No explanation, no acknowledgement, but the passengers knew exactly what had caused it. Midway through taxiing, Adrian removed his phone and sent a brief message to a trusted legal contact. "Incident on Flight 4578. Possible civil rights violation, multiple witnesses, video evidence secured." He hit send. Then he opened a secure communication app used by federal personnel and logged a preliminary report outlining the incident in neutral, factual language. Timestamps, names, direct quotes. He documented everything because documentation changes power. When the plane reached cruising altitude, a senior gate supervisor, Elaine Porter, who had been alerted during the boarding delay, boarded through the forward service entrance while the aircraft was briefly held at a taxi checkpoint due to scheduling congestion. She entered first class with controlled urgency. "Captain," she said quietly near the cockpit door, "I need to understand what happened before this escalates further." Passengers looked up again, phones subtly lifted. Elaine turned toward Adrian. "Sir, I'm the station operations supervisor. I've been informed there was a dispute regarding your seat." "A dispute implies mutual disagreement," Adrian replied calmly. "I was questioned about my presence in a seat I paid for and security threatened to remove me." Elaine's eyes flicked toward Lauren, then toward the captain. "Was the boarding pass valid?" she asked directly. "Yes," Adrian answered. Elaine looked at Lauren. Lauren hesitated. "Yes. And security still threatened removal?" No one answered immediately. The silence spoke for them. Elaine exhaled slowly. She had spent 22 years in aviation operations. She understood optics, she understood liability, and she understood patterns. "I need copies of all incident reports immediately after landing," she said to the captain. Then she turned to Adrian. "Sir, I want to personally apologize for your experience. This is not the standard we operate under." Adrian met her eyes steadily. "This is not the first time I've been questioned in first class on this airline." That statement caused visible discomfort. Elaine's posture shifted. "How many times?" she asked quietly. "3 previous flights in the last 18 months, always in first class, never in economy." The cabin absorbed that information. Elaine's expression hardened, not toward Adrian, but toward her crew. "That will be reviewed," she said firmly. She then addressed the cabin. "If anyone has video footage of this morning's interaction, the company will preserve it for formal review." The woman across the aisle raised her hand slightly. "I have the full recording." "So do I," said the businessman behind her. "And me," added another voice. Elaine nodded. "Please retain your copies. You may be contacted." The gravity of the situation was becoming undeniable. Lauren finally spoke, her voice unsteady. "I didn't mean for this to escalate," Adrian responded calmly without raising his voice. "It escalated because you made an assumption." Elaine glanced between them. "This matter will be formally investigated," she said. Adrian leaned back slightly. "It already is." He did not elaborate, but Elaine understood. Federal investigator, multiple recordings, passenger witnesses, delayed documented. Threat of physical removal. The pieces were assembling quickly. Elaine stepped back toward the service entrance. "Captain, we need to depart immediately. Further delay increases reporting thresholds." The implication was clear. Delays tied to passenger disputes trigger corporate review protocols. The aircraft resumed movement, but what had happened in Seat 1A was now beyond the control of anyone on board. Because by the time the plane reached cruising altitude over the Midwest, the first video clip had already been uploaded, and it was gaining traction, rapidly. By the time Flight 4578 began its descent into Los Angeles, the first video clip had already crossed 800,000 views. The Woman in 2 Billion had posted a 60-second segment showing Lauren questioning Adrian's ticket and implying he hadn't paid for first class. The clip ended just before security threatened removal. The caption was simple. "Black passenger threatened with removal from first class despite valid ticket." Within an hour, the full interaction surfaced online from multiple angles. By touchdown, the hashtag number Seat 1A was trending regionally. Adrian kept his phone face down during landing. He already knew what was happening. Viral momentum follows clear injustice. When the aircraft reached the gate, no one stood immediately. Instead, passengers waited, watching. Elaine Porter re-entered the cabin before the door opened fully. "Mr. Caldwell," she said formally, "may I speak with you privately before deplaning?" Adrian remained seated. "You can speak here," he replied calmly. The cabin stayed silent. Elaine nodded. "The company takes this seriously. We will be initiating a full review." "A review," Adrian repeated. "Of one incident," she hesitated. He continued. "I want every discrimination complaint filed in the last decade examined. I want independent oversight, and I want written confirmation of corrective action." Lauren stood several rows back, pale and motionless. Captain Hensley exited the cockpit and approached slowly. "Sir, again I apologize for how this unfolded." Adrian looked at him evenly. You didn't ask for my side once. The captain had no response. Passengers began standing now, but many paused near seat 1A as they exited. The businessman from row 2 handed Adrian a card. I'm an attorney, I witnessed everything, call me. The woman who filmed leaned in briefly. It's already at 2 million views. Adrian gave a small nod. When he finally stood, the cabin parted slightly, not out of fear, but respect. Elaine walked beside him toward the jet bridge. Corporate leadership has already been alerted, she said quietly. Good, Adrian replied. As they stepped into the terminal, several passengers lingered nearby, still recording. Adrian turned to Elaine one last time before separating. This isn't about compensation, he said. It's about accountability. Within 12 hours, the video surpassed 10 million views. National media outlets began requesting statements. By the next morning, aviation analysts were replaying the footage on live television, questioning training protocols and bias procedures. Lauren Whitfield was placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. Trevor Callahan was suspended by airport authority officials. Captain Hensley was called into emergency review meetings with corporate operations. Internal auditors began examining past complaint data. What they found was worse than leadership expected. Over 9 years, 42 formal complaints alleging discriminatory treatment in premium cabins had been filed. 39 had been dismissed as misunderstandings. 3 remained unresolved. Patterns emerged: similar wording, similar seating classes, similar demographics. By the end of the week, the airline's stock price had dipped 4.8%. Investors don't ignore viral liability. Adrian formally filed a federal civil rights complaint and retained legal counsel. The evidence was overwhelming. Multiple videos, dozens of witnesses, documented delay. Direct quotes captured on camera. And one undeniable fact, a paying passenger had been publicly threatened with removal not for misconduct but for not looking like he belonged. The narrative had shifted beyond one flight. It was now about systemic culture, and the cost of assumption was rising quickly. The internal investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Within 72 hours, corporate executives were reviewing not just the incident on Flight 4578, but years of complaint data buried in archived reports. What initially appeared to be isolated grievances began forming a pattern too consistent to ignore. Premium cabin, question legitimacy, passenger of color, miscommunication noted in file, case closed. Adrian's legal team formally requested preservation of all internal emails related to discrimination complaints. That request alone signaled serious exposure. Media coverage intensified. Panel discussions debated implicit bias in luxury travel spaces. Aviation experts analyzed the body language captured on video. Civil rights advocates pointed out that the threat of physical removal without policy violation crossed a dangerous line. Lauren Whitfield was terminated 5 days after the incident for violation of conduct standards and discriminatory behavior. The company cited failure to follow equitable service protocols. Trevor Callahan's suspension became permanent. Airport authority officials confirmed prior complaints had existed in his personnel file, none fully investigated. Captain Robert Hensley was removed from active flight command pending retraining and review. His 30-year career no longer shielded him from scrutiny, but Adrian was not focused on individual consequences. He was focused on structural change. In a formal statement released through his attorney, he said, "This is not about a seat. It is about access, dignity, and the assumption that certain spaces require justification for certain people." Public response was overwhelming. Within 2 weeks, the original video surpassed 25 million views. Shareholders pressured leadership. Sponsors demanded assurance. Advocacy groups requested meetings. The airline announced mandatory bias training for all flight and ground personnel, third-party auditing of complaint handling, and the creation of a passenger advocacy review board. Adrian rejected the initial settlement offer quietly made behind closed doors. "It's insufficient," he told his attorney. "Policy reform must be written into the agreement." Negotiations intensified. The financial implications were significant, but the reputational damage was far greater. Because the clearest moment in the viral footage wasn't the badge reveal, it was earlier. When a valid boarding pass had been handed over and still wasn't enough. That moment forced a broader question into public conversation. What does belonging actually mean in spaces defined by privilege? 4 months after the incident, a federal civil rights settlement was finalized. The agreement included financial compensation, independent oversight clauses, mandatory annual reporting on discrimination complaints, and measurable compliance benchmarks. Adrian never disclosed the exact amount publicly. He didn't need to. The policy changes were visible, and so was the precedent. He continued his federal career. He still flies first class when necessary. But now, when he boards, the flight attendants greet him with careful neutrality, not suspicion. The lesson was expensive, not because of one confrontation, but because one passenger refused to quietly accept it. And because multiple cameras ensured the world saw what assumption looks like in real time. 5 months after the confrontation in Seat 1A, the outcome was finalized. The airline agreed to a federal civil rights settlement that included substantial financial compensation, independent third-party oversight of discrimination complaints, mandatory annual bias certification for all flight and ground staff, and a public transparency report tracking future incidents. It was no longer handled quietly behind corporate doors. The agreement required measurable reform. Internal audits revealed that complaint dismissals had routinely lacked investigation. Supervisors had labeled cases as misinterpretations without reviewing video or witness statements. That practice ended immediately. 21 employees across various departments resigned or were reassigned following broader compliance reviews. The company's CEO issued a public statement acknowledging systemic failures in recognizing and addressing bias. Adrian Caldwell never held a press conference. He released only one written statement. Respect is not a privilege class benefit. It is a baseline standard. The original video eventually surpassed 40 million views across platforms. It was incorporated into corporate ethics training programs and cited in civil rights seminars examining discrimination in controlled environments like aviation. Lauren Whitfield did not return to airline service. Trevor Callahan's security credentials were permanently revoked. Captain Hensley completed retraining but never regained full command status. For Adrian, the flight became a reference point not of anger but of clarity. He continued his federal service. He continued flying when required. But now, when he presents a boarding pass, it is accepted without hesitation. The most powerful moment was never the badge reveal. It was the silence that followed when a valid ticket wasn't enough. That silence forced a company to examine its culture, it forced policy change, and it demonstrated a simple truth. Bias survives in assumption. Accountability begins when someone refuses to absorb it quietly.